This is Lady B, and this week I am making sleeping masks. Now, I mentioned this before. My son was thinking of maybe making them for Christmas for my godchildren, but we ran out of time and they didn't get made. So now I'm making them instead, and I'll be giving it to them for Valentine's. So they're going to be matching the hats I gave them for Christmas. Now, I've been making these masks for a few years now, and I originally was not planning on making a video of it because I figured it was so simple. But my brother was up for Christmas, and he informed me over Christmas that he was still using the one I had made him 3-4 years ago over other masks he had picked up because it was just the most comfortable sleeping mask he had ever used. And I thought, well, if it's that comfortable, I have to share this. So this is how they're made, or at least this is how I make them. Now, the first thing you're going to need to make your mask is you're going to need a pattern. And I made my pattern by going to a dollar store and picking up a cheap sleeping mask there. You can buy them for $1.25. They don't cost very much. They don't work very well. This is an example of one, and it's terrible. It's practically see-through. And the point of these is supposed to be to block out the light comfortably so you can sleep better. And this doesn't block very much at all. And a lot of them are like that. And even the ones that do block the light tend to be very flimsy or very uncomfortable. You really do get what you pay for when it comes to buying these sleeping masks in the store, but they're really easy to make. So I took my cheap sleeping mask from the store and I traced it to make my pattern. Now, this was a couple years ago, and I have retraced the pattern in order to show you. In this inner line here is my original tracing, because the mask, this is from a child-size mask that I got from the store, not an adult size. This is not the pattern I used for my brother's mask. And so once I had retraced this child-size mask outline, I then put in a seam allowance, and you can see that. And I've only done a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Now, in the past, when I've done them for adults, I've done a 5/8 seam allowance, and there's a lot of trimming involved, and I just didn't want to bother. So I'm taking a shortcut. What seam allowance you use is up to you. This is what I'm using. And the paper I've traced this on, in case you're wondering, you can pay money for tracing paper for pattern paper, and you can find those at various fabric stores, and I really don't know what they cost, but this is just tracing paper I happen to have in my art supplies that I'm using, and it works just fine. I've even done this with just print paper, just standard printing paper. Not a big, it's a little harder to get the pins through, but it still works. But a thinner paper works better. So once you have your pattern, then it's time to start sewing. So here's my fabric pieces that I have saved from Christmas in the 4 different colors. And I'm going to make these masks, I'm going to make double-sided, so it'll be the same fabric on both sides. But for your own masks, here's an example of a mask in progress that is not double-sided. And when you're picking your fabric, you can have as fancy a fabric as you want for the part that's not against your skin. This is an example of it. It's this beautiful rose color. But for the one you're going to put against your skin, you want something that will be comfortable and that will breathe. Now, this black fabric on this side is 100% cotton, and so it will breathe beautifully. And it's nice and soft against the skin. It has a little bit of a of a shimmer to it on the side, but it's a oh, I forget the name of the weave. The weave makes it a little shiny along with the material, but it will breathe and it will be comfortable and it will be soft against the skin, and that is very important. So when you make your own, customize it to suit yourself. Absolutely. Just remember that the side that goes against your skin, you're going to want something that will breathe and will be nice and soft. This fabric is a 100% cotton, and it's a flannel, I believe. Yes, it's a flannel. So this will be very soft against the skin. So it does not matter. I don't need a different lining material for this. That's why I can use it as a double side. So that means that when I cut my fabric out, I want to cut out 2. So I have 2 layers here. And yes, there's wrinkles in it, but I'll take care of that. And this fabric, this flannel, it's brushed on one side, and I want that side out. So I am going to be taking my fabric, because right now my brush side was out, and you want to do the opposite when you're sewing it. So I need to now put the brush sides together instead before I cut it out. For just like on this, as I showed you this mask, this is a very pretty fabric on this side, but this is the inside. It looks even better when you see the correct side, which I showed you before. And so you see how I have, this is the side that will actually be showing on the outside of the mask, and I have that on the inside along with the nice shiny side of the satin. And we want to do the same here. So the brushed side goes in on both of those. And now I just have to pin this and cut it out. I have threaded my machine, and there is one thing I have left to do before I actually sew this, and that is add my elastic. Now I have here a little chart I've made where I have written down the measurements around the head minus the inside measurement on the mask plus the seam allowance. Now if I cut my elastic this length, it would not have any tightness to it. It would be the exact amount to go around their head. If I wanted a little less, I can do a little less. Now, when I'm making these in person for somebody, I will actually take the mask, put it on their face, and put the elastic around and ask them how tight they like it, and get my elastic measurement that way. But this is a gift and it's a surprise, so I can't do that. So I am going to go with this full amount because these are growing kids and I want them to be able to use it for a while. So these are my measurements for my elastic. Now, according to my chart for this red one, which I'm going to do first, I need a 15-inch elastic. So I'm just going to measure that really quick. And this is just 1/4 elastic that I picked up. This is what it is right here. It's the knit non-roll elastic, 1/4 inch, comes in a 3-yard package. The secret here is I want to attach it on the inside. With these masks, it's better to go a little higher than lower. I've had masks where the elastic is lower down and it actually cuts into your eyes. It's not comfortable at all. And you want to bring, I'm not sure how clear this is. Let me see if I can show you better. You want to bring that elastic right up to the edge. And that way it will automatically have the correct seam allowance. Let me pin it and check. it's easy to check because the mask is supposed to be the same both sides. So if I put it together this way, if I got it right, they will match up. And they do. Okay, so they are in the right place. All right, and you'll notice that I'm having this come up out the top. I'm going to be leaving this top open. So now I want to pin this down, marking this top 3 or so inches. And how much space you need in the top is entirely depends on how bulky your fabric is. And I will use those pins to mark where to start and where to stop. Now, if you want your elastic to be adjustable, and I'm not going to do this with these because these are for little children, and I can just imagine things going horribly wrong in some way that I could not possibly foresee if I did this. But for adults, I have found that it helps to add these. You buy these in packs of let's see, 150 of each, and they're actually used on bras. It's this little clasp-like thing used in combination with an O-ring, like that. And just like they're used on bras to make the straps adjustable, they can also be used on these to make your elastic on your mask adjustable. And you can buy these online. I bought these on Amazon. Sometimes your fabric stores will also carry them in smaller amounts. But like I said, I'm not going to be using them because this is for children. But if I was doing this for an adult, I would be using these. But you don't need to. You just do whatever it is that works for you. So, let me drop a couple more pins in this just to hold everything in place. All right, so I have this pinned now, and I have my elastic in it. So now I need to test my tension using a piece of scrap. And that is perfect. I remembered it from last time. So that's not a surprise, but we still double check. Now I am going to go around in my seam allowance, starting from this pin all the way around to that pin. I'm going to start by doing a forward stitch for a 1/4 inch, backing up, reversing for a 1/4 inch, then coming back again. That will lock my stitch in. And done. So it is time to again test, but this time I'm testing my zigzag to see how wide I want it. And yes, that is correct. So now I am going to go around and zigzag also. Once again, it's a reinforcing stitch I like to do. It is technically not necessary, but I find it really helps strengthen, especially on something like this. Now, if you're doing a wider seam allowance, you want to do this zigzag as close as you can to that seam allowance without going to that seam without going over it. In this case, I just keep it inside my 1/4 inch channel. And then normally, after you had sewn the wider seam allowance and you sewed it as close as you could, you would then go back and cut off the excess. So, trim off my extra thread. Now, the reason for the zigzag to reinforce instead of another straight stitch is my next step is to go through, and anywhere there's a curve, I need to clip in between these zigzags, trying not to cut the thread if possible. And this will make it easier when I turn it inside out. Or right side out, technically. Okay, so now that I've clipped that, I'm going to turn it right side out. And that was the reason for that space at the top. Now I might have made that space a little small, but this fabric is thin enough it can take it. And we see how good a job I did or did not do. So there is the base of the mask. Now there's one more thing we need to put to this. I have one more material that is missing, and that is, this is project fleece that you can buy. It's batting, quilt batting for small quilts, fleece, so on and so forth. And I will take a section of it. I use it for things like this. You can buy thicker batting, but this is a thinner. How much you use will determine how thick it is. This is the point where you would iron it to make sure. I think you all know by now that I tend to skip ironing when I can. So there's two ways to do this at this point. You can either draw around it with one of these fabric pencils that will wash away if you get any on your fabric. My fabric pencil is white, so that will not work with this batting. Now, if you don't want to have to deal with the markers, the chalk, or any of that, you could always make a second template on a piece of poster board or something that is the same as your pattern minus the seam allowance. And you could use that to draw on your batting to determine the size. So there are options. All right. So there we go. That's all of them. And I take it and I'm going to stuff it inside the hole. You spread it out to all the corners. And then you just smooth it out, making sure that there's no, if there's any bulk, it's all in the seams. Now comes my least favorite part, and that is I need to hand sew this little bit closed. Double knot at the end makes it more secure. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up into my previous seam from underneath so that I can hide that end. And then I'm going to run my stitch from this side along the top, picking up just a little teeny bit, and then immediately go to the other side and do the same thing, doing my best to match up with where it came out. And what this will do is it will hide that stitch. So it will not be visible when you're done. There we go. And that's closed. So now I need to tie my knot. And if you're not familiar with hand stitched knots, you basically catch a little bit of the fabric or a thread, there we go, and you pull it up so that you have this loop, and then you pull it through the loop and tie it down, and then you do it again, if you can, catching the same spot. And then to hide your end, you're going to go through the seam as far as your needle will let you. Pull it a little tight, clip it, and then spread it back out, and that pulls your thread to the inside. So there is no outside thread involved at all. Now I have one last thing to do, and this one is finished. And that is my reinforcing seam around the outside of the mask. Now I need to again test. So I take some of my scrap batting, and I'm going to put it between my two layers. And I'm going to check my tension. Now this last stitch is actually a decorative one. It reinforces it, but it's also decorative. So if you want to, you can use a different colored thread for it, for an extra little detail. I am now going to go around that same 1/4 inch that I was using as a seam allowance. I'm going to start by one of these. I'm actually going to go just slightly under a 1/4 inch, and if I'm lucky, I'll catch some of this elastic and give it extra reinforcement. And in this case, I don't need to back up because I'm going to go all the way around, and I'll end up on top of my previous thread. So it will automatically lock itself, and then I'll do one back up at the very end. And this outer decorative stitch is done. And it's not just decorative, it also secures the batting. So now the batting's not going to move around inside either. So that is finished. So I just need to do the other 3, and I have Valentine's presents. And that's how it's done. One double-sided sleeping mask, sized for a child. Not for me, though. It's that easy. I love you all, whether new or old. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Until then, whether making your own sleeping mask or some other craft, don't be afraid to suit yourself and make whatever it is you do exclusively you. Always best to pin. I don't always pin because, well, I should. I don't always.